Mr Chairman.
I'm going to call Charles Chauvel.
Chairman. Mr Chairman, I just want to ask the member who's resumed his seat to reflect on the speech he's just given. The Finance and Expenditure Committee, which I had the privilege to chair for a year at the final year of the fifth Labor government, is an important committee, just like the other committees of this Parliament. It's a servant of the Parliament. And I have to say, when I heard the stories that our members reported back as a result of their experience in that committee on this bill, I was shocked. And I think the public will be shocked as well. Because select committees in our unicameral Parliament are designed for one thing and one thing only: to make sure that some scrutiny occurs in respect of important bills. If select committees don't provide that scrutiny, they're not going to get it anywhere else. The quality of this debate so far indicates that, if anybody needed any proof of the proposition. So when a chair of a select committee as important as the Finance and Expenditure Committee simply waves government legislation through for whatever reason, be it his own personal ambition, or be it because he's been nobbled by the minister or what have you, when he circumvents the process, when he circumscribes it by 5 weeks, when he allows a process where the Treasury has written the report from the department before submissions have closed, then what he does is he contributes to that general contempt that people start to feel about this Parliament and the way we operate. And I hope he's proud of himself, because I certainly am not, having heard that contribution. Mr Chairman, there are some excellent supplementary order papers on the table in respect of this part of the legislation. And I think we ought to do our jobs. We're on TV, we're on the radio, people are watching. And rather than trade rhetoric across the House or hear these sort of vainglorious claims that come from the other side, it might actually be useful for the committee to use its time to look at those supplementary order papers and to consider their merits. Now, there's an excellent one from Clayton Cosgrove, supplementary order paper number 49. The Minister of Justice thinks that's amusing, but her sense of humour clearly leaves something to be desired. Yeah, well, the supplementary order paper number 49 and supplementary order paper number 50 are well worth a careful look, and I hope that the Minister in the chair, the Minister for Police and Corrections, will look at the supplementary order papers with care and will take the advice of officials who are...
Order. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I hope that she will take the advice of the officials who are here at 20 to 10 on a Tuesday night and consider whether or not to recommend to her colleagues that these provisions be adopted. Because, as has been said, there are precious few safeguards in this legislation. We heard the Prime Minister stump during the election campaign about the importance of this asset sales policy. And the National Party claim a mandate for ramming this through, despite the fact they're doing it on a 60-61 vote tonight and otherwise in the House and in the committee. But what that claim neglects is that the Prime Minister was very careful to talk about mum and dad investors and majority ownership for New Zealanders and ensuring limits on foreign ownership of those precious assets, all those things that resonated so well during the election campaign. Well, what do we see in the bill? Precious few safeguards to fulfil those promises made to the country. And that makes a mockery of the claim that there's a mandate for anyone to do what is being done tonight in the House. Supplementary Order Paper 49 would lower the percentage of any mixed ownership model company permitted to be held in the hands of any one owner. And it would lower the threshold from 10% to 1% so as to avoid the concentration of ownership in too few hands. Now, we heard from my colleague Phil Goff earlier and from other speakers, it wouldn't take much, given the current 10% limit, for entities that are foreign controlled to acquire a controlling stake in one of these companies. You only need 23, 24, 25% effectively of the voting rights to acquire such a stake. that would be very easy to do under a 10% limit. Much harder to do with a 1% limit, which is why supplementary order paper number 49 is so important, Mr Chairman. Mr Chairman. And supplementary order paper number 50 complements the provisions of supplementary order paper number 49. It would actually do something that the bill completely fails to do at the moment, provide some teeth for breach of the ownership ceiling provisions. Now, that's why supplementary order paper number 50 is well worth consideration. It's why it would be great to hear Anne Tolley get to her feet and tell us what the government's attitude is on this legislation. Claire Curran has put together a very, very carefully calibrated supplementary order paper, and it would actually institute a financial penalty for breaching the ownership limit applied to the mixed ownership model companies. Never mind the 1% that is being proposed on this side, there's nothing to actually require the enforcement of the 10%, except the general application of securities law. And I'm afraid many members of the public, having experienced the blunt end of that, won't have a lot of confidence in it. Whereas what Claire Curran's supplementary order paper would do is actually give some teeth to the law, and it's badly required if we want people to have confidence in the processes that we adopt in this House. Sir, there's another excellent supplementary order paper in the name of Megan Woods, supplementary order paper number 61. Now, what that does is it provides that once a mixed ownership model company has had shares sold to private investors, and where there's a risk that they will put pressure on the company to asset strip in order to make a return on their investment, that's clearly a commercial temptation that will lie on investors of any sort of scale in these businesses. Well, the organisations will be removed from the ambit of many of the acts, ensuring the responsible behaviour of state-owned enterprises. So it's even more important to give the public warning of what these companies are actually doing. So this amendment, Megan Woods' amendment, would provide that the companies can't sell off individual assets like dams and wind farms to private companies in order to accomplish that sort of asset stripping exercise, which would defeat the purpose of the 51% ownership limit clause. Instead, under Megan Woods' amendment, a mixed ownership model company would be required to publicly notify that they intended to sell an asset and then seek the approval of the Governor-General by order in council in order to accomplish such a sale. Now, a related supplementary order paper, or related supplementary order papers, supplementary order papers 51 in the name of the Honourable Phil Goff, and 52 and 51 in the name of Chris Farfoy. And these deal with the attempt to give some teeth to what the Prime Minister promised, but which he's done nothing to accomplish in the legislation, and that is that there would be majority Kiwi ownership in the 49% of these assets that were sold. So under Phil Goff's amendment, the provisions in the SOP would seek to correct the omission of requiring Kiwi mums and dads to be at the front of the queue. Chris Farfoy's amendment would do a similar thing. Phil Goff's would do it by making sure that the bidders were Kiwi taxpayers. Chris Farfoy's would do it by ensuring that the bidders were Kiwi passport holders. And these sort of safeguards are necessary if the National Party wants to claim any sort of mandate for doing what it is doing now, privatising these assets, because there is no way to guarantee that they will be sold to Kiwi investors unless there's some sort of enforcement mechanism such as those that are set out in these supplementary order papers. Now, sir, there are some other important supplementary order papers on the table. Clayton Cosgrove has one, number 48, which would apply the principles of the state-owned enterprises to the mixed ownership model companies. We've seen that the requirement to be a good employer is omitted, the requirement to act socially responsibly is omitted, the requirement to deal in an appropriate way with the assets of iwi vanishes. Well, Clayton Cosgrove's supplementary order paper would remedy those omissions, just as supplementary order papers 57, 55, 59 and 60 would deal with further serious omissions in the scheme of the legislation. Supplementary order paper 57 in the name of David Parker would apply treaty principles to the directors and management of the mixed ownership model companies. Supplementary order paper 55 would ensure that the entire mixed ownership model structure is subject to treaty principles. That's in the name of Trevor Mallard. Supplementary Order Paper 59 would ensure that state enterprises with water resources are not eligible to be sold. These are all important provisions, sir. They should not be dismissed out of hand.
David Clendon.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Mr Chair, I think a characteristic of the